I transcribed a bunch of Stuff Smith lines, and this is what I learned. Before we move on into the rest of the video, I would just like to say, if you want transcriptions and PDFs of all the things that we look at in this video, you can get them on my Patreon. On there, you can also get involved in my weekly Monday night practice club, where we practice together on Zoom. You also get a bunch of different content that I put up every month just for you guys. Plus transcriptions and PDFs from all of the videos that you find on this channel. So I transcribed a bunch of Stuff Smith lines. One of the reasons I did this is because I have a new album coming out and a bunch of tour dates in the diary, all based around the music and the style of Stuff Smith. I recorded an album last year of music inspired by Stuff Smith's playing and Stuff Smith's compositions. All my own music. It's out April the 16th, and you can get more information about that in one of the links below. And secondly, I did this for my people on Patreon. So I transcribed all these lines, and we've been working on it in my Jazz Violin Practice Club every Monday. And I've been putting up videos for my Patreon people, as well as the PDFs and transcriptions of all those videos. Doing all these transcriptions really helped solidify my thoughts on Stuff's playing. And in this video, I'm going to share with you sort of 3 main points about his playing that I think are really important. I've got 2 main points about Stuff's playing, and then one last one that I'll tell you right at the end that I think is very, very important. Point number 1 is that generally I think Stuff Smith plays very, very simply. A lot of Stuff Smith's playing is based on simple riffs just put in the right place and played with great rhythm. Doesn't play loads of chromatic notes all the time. He's not really playing in a bebop style. Stuff did live through the bebop era and carried on playing as he did. He plays in a sort of swing style, using riffs and simple lines that he can sort of build upon rhythmically throughout his solos. Have a little listen to these lines that I transcribed from my Patreon people. 1, 2, 3. So line number 1, a real simple one. I played it here in C, and it's basically based around the root note with a little bit of that bluesy flattened third going up to the major third. In the video that you just heard me playing, I took that line and I sort of improvised around a 12-bar blues with it. And this is the sort of thing that I think is important to note. Stuff had a lot of simple lines that he played a lot, and he played over and over again, but every time he would play it different, and he would use it as a catalyst to sort of create a vibe and create a rhythmic happening. When you hear Stuff Smith play this music or play jazz, you can really tell that he is just a dyed-in-the-wool jazz violinist. He did learn a little bit of classical stuff with his father, who was a great violinist himself, but I read in the book Pure at Heart by Anthony Barnetts, the first thing that made him want to play the violin was actually listening to Louis Armstrong. Stuff had a violinist for a dad, but he loved jazz. He loved Louis Armstrong. So when he heard Louis Armstrong, he just thought, well, why don't I try and play this music on the violin? Stuff's playing is pure jazz. It's pure jazz rhythm, and that's the main thing that I take from this. Have a little listen to me doing that same thing with a different line. Now this line is a simple sort of major 7 sounding line. It's the sort of thing that you can play on major 7 chords. You can also play it on minor 7th chords if you start it from the 9 of that minor 7. And it's just a line that you'd hear so much in big band music. And in all jazz, you would hear Louis Armstrong playing it. You would hear it in Count Basie's charts. It's just a line that you hear all the time. And Stuff really does like to utilize this line a lot. It's worth learning this line for that reason. In my version, again, I played it over a 12-bar blues in C, and then I transposed it to fit on different chords as well, and sort of changed it if I wanted to make it fit different types of chords. I changed it when I played over the F7. I added a flat 7 at the top of it, so I added an E flat there rather than the major 7. It's worth trying to do this with lines that you take down. Take that line down, work out what it is, play it in exactly the same place that you've heard it, and then try and find different places, different chords, transpose it into different keys, and find different places that you can use it. So those two lines are very indicative of the sort of thing that Stuff plays generally, okay? So his playing in general, I think, is very, very simple. He plays around with riffs, he plays around with playing those riffs with different rhythms. He also just takes very simple, nice, melodic jazz lines and utilizes them throughout the chords. This takes me to my second point, is Stuff also did like to sort of play out. He liked to play quite complicated sounding lines that when you hear them, you might think, well, what's he thinking about here? That's that must be some sort of crazy concept. Have a little listen to this one. For my Patreon people, I called this one a diminished-ish line, because that's sort of what it is. What Stuff's done here is he's taken some diminished arpeggio ideas. He's found a nice pattern on the G string to start off with, and then he's just taken that pattern, that finger pattern, that utilizes some diminished ideas, and then he's just basically done that same thing up a fifth on the next string, then up a fifth on the next string, then up a fifth on the next string, and then sort of brought it back into the chords. This, in a way, to a lot of jazz musicians, might sound sort of like cheating, because it's not really following any specific concept, but it sounds really cool. Because what we've got here is continuity, because we've got a pattern that makes sense to the ears to some degree, and then just taking it up a fifth, taking it up a fifth, taking it up a fifth. Basically, it feels really nice under the fingers for a violinist. I think if you were to show this to a piano player, they'd be like, what's going on? But to a violinist, it feels really nice because it's just the same thing on different strings of the violin. It's a very violinistic line, but it still sounds pretty out there. It sounds pretty crazy. I think that this is such a integral part of Stuff Smith's playing. Stuff was very aware that he played the violin. He wasn't listening to other instruments and thinking, I need to play exactly the same thing as these guys if I want to play jazz. What he did have is he had this amazing sense of rhythm and amazing sense of jazz melody through just listening to it a lot and probably playing it with people who were jazz musicians like himself. But he didn't try to follow exactly what those musicians did. He realized he was a violinist and he took those ideas, maybe in this case a diminished idea, and he made it work for him on the strings of the violin. It's a super intuitive and it's a super natural way to play jazz on the violin. And I would implore you to try and do the same thing yourself. It's something that I often try to do as well. It's hard and it's hard. I'm never going to come up with things that are as good as Stuff Smith's ideas. However, I think it's important that we take this idea of basically making sure that what we play or what we practice is something that's going to come out naturally on our instrument. In my opinion, listening to somebody like John Coltrane or Miles Davis or Charlie Parker and trying to play exactly the same stuff that they play, it's just never going to come out super naturally and it's always going to sound a little bit jilted. Stuff Smith would take ideas that he heard in other jazz recordings or from other jazz musicians and he would make it work for him as a violinist. And now to my last point, the most important point. Stuff Smith knew what the chords were. You could tell from listening to everything that he does that he always knew what the chords were. Yes, he might play simply, and yes, he might play sort of crazy things that just work on the violin because they work on the violin, but he always brought it back to the chords. And again, reading Anthony Barnetts' Pure at Heart helps solidify this. There's a great interview here with Stuff. Stuff's talking about bebop, and he was actually not really into bebop. I don't agree with him here. I love bebop, but he, at the time when it was coming out, Stuff Smith didn't love bebop. And here I'm just going to read a little bit of it. So this is Anthony, who wrote the book and was friends with Stuff, asked him, what was your reaction to the young modern musicians, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, during the mid-1940s? And Stuff said, well, at the time I thought they were very foolish because they were playing notes that didn't fit in the cycle of chords. They were just playing all around the chords, in the chords, out the chords. And then Anthony says, but your own music was revolutionary. You played unusual things. And Stuff says, yes, but it was always I'd fall into that chord somewhere. There you go. Stuff knew what the chords were. And I think he was right when he was talking about this. He did always fall into the chords. He would play these crazy things, but he would always bring it back to the chords. So to recap, number 1, Stuff played very, very simply. Number 2, Stuff took strange out ideas and made them work for his own instrument. And number 3, Stuff really did know what the chords were. So if you want to play a little bit like Stuff Smith, you want to bring that vibe into your own playing, you've got to play simply, you've got to make things work for your own instrument, and you've got to know the chords. Thanks for checking this out. See you again.